everybody, it's me, Hugh Martyr, back at you again with another video. I've been gone for a while, I've been busy with the Addams Family, but now, in a pretty existent sense, I am back. So, today, I'd like to talk about a set of characters that I feel really doesn't have much to any appreciation, and that I love with all my heart and soul. And these are three Batman villains. And the reason I can group them together is because they almost always work together or are in the same story, doing roughly the same thing. They're side characters in a set of comics called the Batman Adventure Comics, which is, I believe, based on an animated series, which is honestly kind of funny. It's like reverse engineered. Rather than a animation coming from a comic book, it's a comic book coming from an animation. And this was the same animation, like Batman Adventures, something like that. This was based on the Mark Hamill Joker. That was that show. I don't remember the exact name. Maybe I'll put it up on screen. But it was a huge show, and it's a very well written show. And the books are pretty great too. They're all very cheesy. None of them are very meaningful, and don't expect any grand meaning from these guys. But they made fantastic characters there. They really changed up a lot of character norms and changed them for the better. Mr. Freeze went from a joke into a real threat on that show. So anyway, that's the comic that they're coming from. And they are the Professor, Mastermind, and Mr. Nice. I'm putting a picture of them up right now because really I can't do it justice without images. And I don't know if they existed in the show, but I do know that they existed in the comic books. It wouldn't surprise me if they only existed in the comic books, because no one seems to be aware of any of them. And that's probably really valid. Like, that show, the comic books in particular, made a lot of small tweaks and changes that really don't carry over to other Batman media. Like, at one point, Joker had a super soldier sort of guy he named the Straight Man that was just physically amazing and would sort of distract the Batman. But I'm getting off topic. The Mastermind, Professor, and Mr. Nice are three fantastic Batman villains. And I'd like to go every one of them, starting with Mastermind. Now, Mastermind, it's an interesting name, and I find him interesting because he isn't that masterfully minded. The thing with Mastermind is that he cannot compute with humans. He is a human himself, and there's nothing robotic about him. To get that out of the way, he isn't Brainiac. Mastermind's big thing is just logic, cause and effect, that kind of thing. Rube Goldberg machines, just anything that doesn't involve the natural human error, because it's in our nature for humans to not be, very mathematically predictable. Anything predictable, he can master. That's why he's the mastermind. Like, he can figure out the best way for you. He can figure out how long a standard security camera takes to sweep from side to side, figure out where they all are in a museum, and then find a route that he can precisely time to get by all the security cameras without having to disable any of them. Or, well, because of how actual security camera museums work, probably only disabling one of them, or very little. A real thing he did, that was just an example, was create a map of downtown Gotham that would allow a map of downtown Gotham roads based on the timing of the light system to be able to travel 90 miles an hour in downtown Gotham without hitting a single red light. And I really find that makes so much sense to me. Like, of course, there's the human error of other people on the road being dummies, and I believe his reign of terror is stopped by a human police officer who's doing his thing at a crosswalk, directing traffic, and Mastermind couldn't predict that, and that's how he gets caught. But that's why I like Mastermind. That's Mastermind's entire thing, and the idea behind Mastermind is that, theoretically, he is smarter than Batman. Theoretically. Because Batman, of course, outwits him. He catches up, he beats him up. Mastermind is not a very physically able person. He really couldn't defeat Batman mano a mano, but technically, he can defeat Batman by outwitting him, by creating a situation in which Batman can't win. Mastermind has all the means by which to do that. It's simply the fact that he lives in a world where there are humans that prevents him from doing that. The fact that, at the end of the day, he can't do everything because there are humans and he can't predict humans. So on his surface, that's what makes Mastermind so great. Then we move on to Mr. Nice, and Mr. Nice is just the greatest man alive. He's a himbo, he's a dummy, and he's the greatest. He is some sort of super soldier. He is the product of a Olympic level gymnast and a NFL athlete, a football athlete, of course, and was granted incredible agility and athletic prowess at a very young age and growing up. In his youth, he disarmed a robber and held him up to, you know, like, help his parents and blah, blah, blah. And he's just a physically incredibly powerful guy. Like, there's a bit of plot armor, but at one point he raids a military post. He raids a military outpost, and they are firing at him, and he does not stop moving. Which means that either he is wearing a vest, which could be that's a very, very, very valid point, but he has no facial armor, and everybody is shooting at him, and there are mortars going off, because of course there are, and at one point, like, 12 men come and try to beat him up at the same time and hold him down, and he just bursts out of there. Pictures should be up on the screen. He's just physically powerful beyond measure. And like, of course, with a world where Superman, he's not Superman. He can't fly, he can't quite jump amazing heights, but he's practically the perfect human. And in that way, he could defeat Batman. A man that can punch his way into an armored car could beat Batman. But what stops Mr. Nice is not that Batman is smarter than him, well, he is, but it's that he's nice. Mr. Nice is very, very nice. When he robbed an armored car and did his best act gruff and cool, and he was like, I'm gonna take all of this money, one of the guards started crying. And he was like, why are you crying? And the guard explained that this job meant a lot to him because it was going to help him pay for somebody in his life, so I forget who, but they were in a terrible medical condition and he needed the money. He was going to need the money from the job to pay for her procedure. And Mr. Nice says, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And then gives some of the cash he just robbed to the man. And then the other guards are just like gathered around him being like, well, yeah, you know, I wouldn't object to also receiving money. And Mr. Nice starts attempting to evenly distribute the money among himself and the guards just to make sure they're cool with it. And then Batman shows up and he's like, darn, okay, bye guys. He's nice. He's a nice boy. He'd never hurt anybody. Or, well, he wouldn't lastingly hurt anybody. I know he wouldn't kill anybody, but he's willing to, like, hurt people. Like, his whole origin story is that he was a TV show host, and, like, terrorists came on into the studio to negotiate a hostage situation, and he beat them all up with a plastic toothbrush on air, and ever since then, his reputation was absolutely gone. Just, pow, it's out of there. No more reputation for you, sir. But, he's still a really nice guy, and he couldn't hurt Batman. Batman's a good guy. I mean, he's a bad guy, but Mr. Nice is a bad guy, but I mean, Batman's a good guy. Guys, we can't hurt dogs. That would be mean. So Mr. Nice is just the greatest guy ever, and technically, he could defeat Batman. And then we come to the Professor. And the Professor is a fantastic piece of work. He's this older-looking man who, like, smokes a pipe and has, like, a suit jacket on and just seems very fancy. And he's constantly reminiscing about old times, and apparently he's been a criminal for a long time. And he's just experienced, very seriously experienced. Now, Mastermind has him around. They travel together in a pack because Mastermind knows that the Professor has a much more lasting grasp on the human psyche, and the Professor does. The Professor understands quite a lot. The Professor knows about all the little trivia. He knows about the Pearl in the cave way out in downtown, in the weird, like, sticks of Gotham. He knows about the emerald that's going to come here and now and then, and he knows how to cut the wiring system because he's done it before. And he knows about the military compound that has the nuclear warheads because he read it somewhere or something. And he's just a very, very, very knowledgeable guy. And one of the best parts about that knowledge is that, theoretically, he could beat Batman. Because he's shown to not have any, like, physical inability to fight Batman. In fact, he's shown to be a pretty good boxer and just have a pretty good grasp on physical ability. And, not only that, but he can predict Batman to some extent. There's this moment where he's working with someone and they're like, you, quickly, grab the diamond. I'll hold Batman off. And, like, he's charging for Batman, and the professor says, not that way you won't. He's going to flip you over his head. And then Batman flips the man over his head, and the professor says, see? That's the problem with kids these days. They never listen. And I find that fantastic. And I feel like that's the writer's way of saying that the professor could beat Batman. And the professor never wants to fight Batman because he's really bizarrely lazy about everything. Like, he's constantly reminiscing and never really participating extremely with any of the crimes. He helps them get out of, he helps the trio that they are get out of prison. He comes up with some of their jobs, but he's really just disconnected from a lot of the actual happening, which is just, and he, like, writes a lot in his journal about his memories and stuff like that, his memoirs. And then when a reporter came to get his backstory too, he was like, I don't really have one. Which I find the funniest thing in the world, because he constantly is, like, leaving little bits and pieces like, oh, Nitro, that sure brings back memories, or, oh, I wish it was like the old days where you could really rob a diamond, or stuff like that. He has all of those little tidbits, and then he won't share his life story or origin story because he doesn't particularly have one. And it's just the weirdest thing. I believe he's supposed to be high or something, but he's just the best character. And he could beat Batman, technically. And that's why I love those villains. Not because they add to Batman, because they really don't. In most of the stories where they exist, the focus isn't on Batman, it's on them. And obviously the writers had, like, I bet they were OCs, original creations, and they just wanted to throw that in there and paint it under a Batman picture. And it does fantastically every time. Like, I love their little adventures where usually they fail because Mastermind didn't account for this, or Mr. Nice is too nice to do that, or the professor just doesn't warn Mastermind or Mr. Nice that, in fact, the Pearl isn't going to be ready to be a Pearl for another 100 years, fellas. Slipped my mind, excuse me. They're just fantastic, fantastic villains. And I just wanted to, like, put that out there, because recently I've been seeing a lot of why blank is the best Batman villain. And I just wanted to lay that out there, that these guys, they're fantastic Batman villains. They may not be the best, but they're fantastic. Thank you all so much for watching.